Good morning. Looks like a number of people have either dropped or decided not to come to class today, so we've got a small group, which is going to be bad for them because we're going to do a critical thinking challenge. We're a little bit behind because I forgot to bring the recorder the day that we were going to talk about social styles, and so I put that off until this class period. So I moved it from the first exam period into this exam period. And that actually works pretty well because we're going to do a critical thinking challenge today. I'll give you some time in class to work on it and some time in class on Thursday to work on this in your groups that deal with prospecting and using social styles and the VALS network that we look at in order to find a prospect and then identify what you think their social style is going to be and whether or not they're an innovator or something else based on a VALS network and how you're going to get to that person. So I can be like Sherman marching to Atlanta when you need to. So I've opened up D2L and I have an example. I've pulled up the Dropbox that you'll be using for this one to give you the location of it. So you go to Assessments, Dropbox, and then the Prospecting Challenge when we get to that part today. So we need to start by talking about social styles to begin with. Personality and psychology are very, very important in marketing, and social styles is not as in-depth as looking at personality. Now, I will tell you that the two foundational disciplines of marketing and sales, and this should come tripping off your tongue by the end of the semester, along with the fact that marketing is the only integrated function of the firm, are psychology and economics. Both of which I make merciless fun of because psychology is the closest thing to witchcraft that we teach on a college campus, and economics is really not much of a science. They call it the dismal science, and I don't think it's a science. Economists are good at two things. If you want to get a worthless degree, get a degree in economics. They're good at two things. They're good at renaming stuff that we all understand intuitively with really nice sounding fancy 50-cent words rather than using 10-cent words. So for example, when we talked about ethics in here, I told you that economists talk about the maximization of utility in a capitalistic marketplace. And basically what this means from an individual perspective is that you want to get the most bang for your buck. We didn't need a fancy term to tell us that. You want your dollar to stretch as absolutely far as it can. And from a macroeconomic perspective, it means that in theory, that those people who desire resources the most will put those resources to the highest and best use and are therefore willing to pay the most for them. Now, what it doesn't deal with, of course, are what we might call marketing failures or externalities, but that's all beyond the scope of this course. I'm just telling you this as a reminder because redundancy is good. I'm a lawyer, and so I like to repeat myself to remind people. And in marketing, we call it the three exposure hypothesis. In order to get people to really remember something, you have to expose it. You have to expose them to it 3 times. So once again, economics, worthless, rename stuff, not good at predicting. Economists are never good at predicting what's going to happen in the future. They're good at explaining what's happened in the past, which I don't think is science. I think that's really history. So the other part is psychology. Well, psychology, the reason I say it's like witchcraft is, like, let's lay down on the couch and tell me all of your problems and see if we can figure out how someone as damaged as you can possibly manage to get up and face the world every single day, right? Well, it turns out that that whole psychotherapy stuff actually may be doing more damage. It forces you to repeat things that maybe you should repress. There's a lot of evidence in the psychiatry, not psychology, but the psychiatry literature now that suggests that's the case, that people's brains do things in order to cope with certain things, and maybe reliving them is not the best way to do this. And if you think about this in your own personal lives, if you've ever had a breakup with your boyfriend, girlfriend, fiancé, and significant other, that's probably a traumatic experience for you. And probably every time you think about it, you bring back all these memories to the surface, and it's not terribly helpful. So having said that, and having made fun of these two foundational disciplines of marketing, I will nonetheless use them to the extent that they are helpful for us. And so in talking about sales, we have to deal with people, obviously, and so understanding some kind of motivation is going to be critical. Social styles helps us deal with, once we understand what motivates people, how we're going to communicate with them in order to give them the products and services that they need and desire, and so that we communicate with them in the most effective way possible. And we talked about communication in the last test period, but again, this is how all of this stuff sort of integrates and becomes important from a holistic perspective, and realizing that you can't just treat these topics as individual silos. So in communicating, one of the things that I talked about was this idea that oftentimes we communicate past one another because we have noise or we don't have necessarily a shared frame of reference. And the example that I think I gave you, but if I didn't, I'll give it to you again, because again, redundancy is good, is that we attach meaning to things, but the way we attach meaning to things may be radically different from person to person. So for example, if you are a Republican historically, and I don't know about now since Donald Trump has entered the picture and everything seems to be chaotic with regard to what the parties actually believe or stand for, but in the past, historically, what Republicans have stood for has been what we might call, and what George Lakoff calls in moral politics, the strong father model. And so Republicans talk about family values, for example. And when they talk about family values, what does the strong father model mean to a Republican and family values? What do you think? Just by what I'm saying here, think about, and if you can give me a cogent response, it'll be worth an individual 5 points for the second exam today. What does the strong father model entail? What?
The head of the household.
Okay, and who's the head of the household?
The dad.
The dad. The dad is the head of the household, and what? What does that mean? You should
He
do.
has like kind of like the larger hand and everything. Like he's the one in charge and he's control what goes on and on. Like he has the final say. Basically.
Okay, all right, very good. That's correct. It's the Leave It to Beaver model of family values. You get 5 points for today. What is that Leave It to Beaver model of family values? Well, if any of you remember, Leave It to Beaver was on, by the way, I'm not that old, but it was on at Nick at Night when I was growing up, and so I watched the reruns. The Beaver was already pretty old by the time I was growing up, but I did watch those reruns on Nick at Night. And Ward Cleaver would come home at the end of the day, and Mrs. Cleaver would be in high heels, and this looks like going to a party cocktail dress, you know, with the underskirts and petticoats, and this little apron on, and she would be vacuuming the house in high heels. And it was exemplified by other television shows of that era, things like Father Knows Best. The idea that you listen to dad and that's what you... So for Republicans, family values means this strong father model. Democrats will also say we have family values, but they attach radically different pictures in their mind to what family values mean. So if you can, for 5 points, the first person who can tell me what they think the Democrats' model of family values is, it'll be worth 5 points to you. Who wants to give me an answer as to what Democrats mean by family values?
Maybe like a non-traditional family, like maybe there's 2 moms and 2 dads.
Okay, absolutely. And it takes a village. Hillary Clinton wrote a book based on an African proverb called It Takes a Village. The idea that to raise a child, it's not just about a strong father and a mother and 2.7 other kids in the family and the cat in the front yard and the white picket fence, that it involves your aunts and your uncles and your grandparents and your extended social group. It can involve friends. That family is what we make of it. There are those people that are related to you by blood, but family is broader than that for a Democrat. They include people like your extended, as I said, family, your friends, your significant others. And so what happens is that engaging in this dialogue, Republicans and Democrats oftentimes talk past each other because they're not understanding, they don't have the same field of reference. And one of the things that can really hamper that is if you don't have the same field of reference, if you're also using a different social style. So social styles are sort of a quick and dirty way of thinking about the way people express themselves. It's not as in-depth as personality, such as the MMPI or the Myers-Briggs. Now, the Myers-Briggs is kind of, in my opinion, it's kind of pseudoscience. It's not really well developed compared to the MMPI. If you've ever taken the MMPI, let's see if I can find it. This is a Myers-Briggs test that you can take. Some of you may have taken it. You basically answer questions and it comes up with 16 personality types based on whether you're expressive or introverted and things like that. And so you can take these quick and dirty sort of tests fairly commonly online and figure out what your personality type is. Again, Myers-Briggs is less scientific, at least from the standpoint of most psychiatrists, psychologists, and psychometrists. The MMPI is the more complete one. The MMPI consists of 350 sort of yes/no questions, as I understand it, and it really, really pinpoints all kinds of disorders, and you can go through then the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, version 5, to figure out sort of what your psychoses are. So this is beyond, that's way beyond what we're going to talk about in this class, because obviously when you go out and you start talking to people as a salesperson, you're not going to be able to say, well, by the way, would you mind taking, even the Myers-Briggs, which is a very quick and sort of dirty version of it, would you mind taking this test so I can figure out what you are, and then I can, you know, use that to manipulate you in a sales setting. That's not going to work, right? So you can pick up on social styles much easier, and they're more helpful in dealing with that. Now, there are 4 distinct social styles based on a 2x2 matrix. Degrees of responsiveness is on the vertical axis, and degrees of assertiveness is on the horizontal axis. What that means, if there are 4 distinct categories, if we have this 2x2 matrix, and I'll show you this, is that for every person that you meet, there's a 1 in 4 chance that they're not the same style as you. Now, as salespeople, what does that mean? Are you going to ignore those people who just don't have the same? Are you going to cut out 3/4 of your business because I just can't communicate with you? We're not getting it. No. You're not going to do that, are you? You're going to want to communicate with those people, and so understanding them becomes critical. So responsiveness is whether or not you're task-oriented or sort of people-responsive. And then do you ask questions or do you tell on the assertiveness axis? So we have 4 distinct types. Now most people have a dominant type, and I asked you to take the social styles. How many of you did that? I showed you the social styles thing on the D2L site tonight. It's under. You should probably take it. I think, didn't I ask you to take it last time? The time before?
Oh, is that, I guess, a worksheet on?
Yeah, it is. It's a worksheet on D2L. If you go into module 1,
Yeah.
and then you go to the social styles PDF, you can take that. So you should probably take that and figure out where you are. On this 2x2 matrix. So the types, analytical is low in responsiveness and low in assertiveness. So what does this mean? Analyticals tend to be serious. They think things over for a long time, but they're very persistent. They'll do their research. They'll really, before they buy things, go out and study the issue. I will tell you that I'm not necessarily an analytical, but everybody has sort of a primary type and then sort of a secondary type. And I'll give you an example of this. Years ago, when I was married, our microwave broke. And so when I make a decision to buy something, I generally go about, unless it's buying a Coke out of a vending machine or buying something that is rather trivial. You know, what am I gonna have for dinner tonight, things like that. I have a tendency to go out and start gathering information, and I compile, for years and years and years, I don't do it so much anymore, because I can save it all online in folders. I can put all of this stuff, I mean, it's very easy to organize stuff online, so I have a virtual notebook that I compile when I want to buy something. So I went out and I started looking at stuff, getting information on microwaves. It turns out that microwaves do all kinds of really interesting things. I grew up, I remember the first microwave that my family bought. Have I told you all this story? If I told you this story, I'll skip it. Have I told you this? No, okay. I remember the first microwave my family bought. It was in the early 1980s. I was born in 1973, and it was in the early 1980s, and it cost $1,000, which at that point in time was an astronomical amount of money. And this was supposed to be the wave of the future. And it was this large box that was huge and extraordinarily heavy. It had a door that you just pulled open. It didn't have a button or anything like that. And those early microwaves, as I recall, were actually kind of dangerous because you could turn them on without the door being closed. So you could stick your head or your brother's head in the microwave, which was a product's liability issue, as I recall that. I may have that wrong, but I think that was the case. So it had this handle, and then it had two large dials on it. One dial, the top dial, was for the power, which it basically had 3 settings, sort of a low, medium, and full power setting. And it had a second dial down below it that you turned for the amount of time that you wanted to spend cooking your food, whatever it was that you were cooking. And it didn't have a turntable. It just had a white sort of box. And basically the power settings on a microwave, how do those work? How do power settings work? If you turn down the temperature in the oven, it actually like reduces, if you have a gas oven, which I have, it actually reduces the flames. And then it monitors it and it may kick it off and on, right? Microwaves, it's basically like 25% power or low is basically like 25% of the time it's shooting microwaves at it and then pulsating and stopping. Because it didn't have a turntable feature in it, it really meant that you had to do what? Every few minutes, if you had something that you was going to cook for very long, you had to kind of rotate it and stir it. Modern microwaves have become much better at this. They've got this turntable in there that will get everything, you know, nice and evenly cooked if you put it in the center, and even if you don't put it in the center of the box. Basically, what I remember of our first microwave was it was a really wonderful way to heat water and nothing else. It was a really fast way to heat up a cup of coffee if you wanted instant coffee. I don't think anybody actually drinks instant coffee anymore, but that was a big thing. They invented instant coffee. We have the space program, by the way, to thank for all kinds of inventions, including computers, because we had to shrink the size of this down in order to be able to get it onto a spaceship. And that's one of the reasons that we have computers that we can now hold in the palm of our hand. We also can thank the space race for instant coffee. They made this. Nobody drinks instant coffee anymore. Do they even sell it? Store it, I haven't seen it. Can you still buy Folgers instant coffee? It's kind of god-awful stuff, but lots of people actually used to drink it. Yeah, that's true. There are several things that you can make with instant coffee. I had forgotten about that, but as far as coffee goes, it's really kind of god-awful stuff. Ranks right up there with Starbucks, the tool of the devil, in my opinion. So it was really good for making hot water so that you could have tea or instant coffee and not much else. Everything else kind of turned out goopy or soggy in it. They started making TV dinners. They made TV dinners for a long time, but you put them in the actual oven, and it took about 35 to 40 minutes to cook. The microwave was a vast improvement on that, although it had a tendency to burn half of it and freeze half of it. They've gotten much, much better. Microwaves today have all kinds of features on them, don't they? Instant popcorn has become such a big thing that, and people eat it so much that there's, on most microwaves now, there's a popcorn feature. You simply take any of the major brands of popcorn or the off brands of popcorn, toss it in the microwave, hit the popcorn button, and voila, you have popcorn in no time at all. So there are all of these features that you can have in a microwave. If you're really going to cook with it, lots of people have microwaves in their offices that are little. If you're going to cook like a really big meal in it, you may not want the little one because they don't have as much power. It takes longer to cook. They also have things now. I saw a microwave when I was doing this research that would not only cook it in a microwave, but you could also bake it. So you could. One of the things that was really bad about my early microwave experiences was that everything, if it wasn't supposed to be soggy, it was going to turn out kind of soggy in a microwave. I remember I had friends who thought that like making grilled cheese sandwiches in the microwave was just great because it was really easy. You took some of that god-awful processed American cheese made by Kraft, stuck it in the microwave between two pieces of bread and turned it on for a minute, and you got a voila grilled cheese sandwich. And my friends loved this, and I was always just disgusted by it because the crust ends up. Have any of you ever made a grilled cheese in the microwave? It's kind of disgusting. The bread turns out kind of soggy, but I have these friends that just were deprived, I guess, and so they love this. Well, now microwaves come with this toasting feature, so that you can grill cheese and then turn it on. And, the reason that it gets soggy is that the humidity builds up in the box, and then it makes everything sort of mushy. Well, now microwaves come with this toasting feature on them. They come with far more power settings than 25, 50, and 100%. They've got all kinds of ranges. They come in all kinds of different power settings and power ranges that you can get. And so I started compiling the notebook on the microwave. We're going to make this purchase, start compiling the notebook on the microwave. And I come home one day, and my wife at the time had just bought a microwave. Where did this come from? I went out and bought it at Walmart. Why'd you buy that model? It matched our other appliances. No. Like, did you consult the notebook? Did you look at the notebook? No. It's probably one of the reasons why we're divorced, because there was this utter look of disdain on my face, like look, Tart, consult the notebook. Don't just buy something. And that's analyticals. They can ask too many questions, and they can lead to analysis paralysis, and they never do anything. Because they're so, one thing leads to another. I have a friend like this. He's my former boss here at UCO. He's definitely not the type of personality I am. He's much more of an analytical. And as a lawyer, he abhors conflict, which is interesting for a lawyer, but he's very good at doing sort of the legal research part of the job, because he can delve into it and look at things from lots of different angles and really examine things. And so analyticals are very slow to take action. They think things over, they ask a lot of questions. That can be annoying, and so you'll see if for different types of individuals, that can be annoying because they want an answer quickly. Amiable are high on responsiveness and low on assertiveness. Amiables tend to be loyal, personable, patient. You all have friends like this. They're like Job. When I say they're like Job, what does that mean? Who was Job? Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of an awful story in the Bible, isn't it? The archangel Hasatan, who becomes the devil, is absent from heaven. God says, "Where have you been?" "Oh, here and there, walking around." God says, "Well, in your travels, you've probably come upon my servant Job, who's surely a righteous man." The archangel says, "Yes, I did. And of course he's righteous. He has everything. He's wealthy, he's got a great family, you know, blah, blah, blah. Biblical scholars would be horrified at my sort of very quick and dirty. If you took all that away, would he still be so righteous? So they engage in a bet. And this is God and an angel betting on a, you know, whether or not. And so all of this stuff goes away, and does Job ever, you know, I mean, at the end, he's just left in a wretched state. Does he ever curse the name of God? No. That's your amiables. They're patient, personable, they'll put up with your faults, but they're uncomfortable with risk. They're highly, highly risk averse. What does that mean when you're trying to sell to an amiable if they're risk averse?
They don't like to take chances and they don't want to risk it.
Which means what for
It'd be really
a
hard to sell
salesperson?
to them.
Yeah.
Can be really hard. What do you have to do?
Make them feel comfortable.
You have to reassure them a lot. You have to, you have to reassure them. Drivers, low responsiveness, high assertiveness. Drivers are very task-oriented. They like clearly defined goals. They're committed. Once they make a decision, they do not back down. And they're risk takers. They're not risk averse. Donald Trump is probably the epitome of a driver. Just want to get it done. I just want to make deals. Doesn't matter whether the deal is any good or not. Got to do a deal. And once they've committed themselves, what do you think is one of the biggest characteristics of Donald Trump? That's maybe going to be his downfall.
Pride.
Pride, and inability to admit he's wrong. George W. Bush had the same thing. They asked him what mistakes he had made. None. That's what he said in the press conference. I can't think of any. Really? None? Leader of the free world, complex decision making? None? You made no mistakes? Then you have expressives, high responsive, high assertive. These are your musical theater people. They like to be the center of attention. They're very, very extroverted and people-oriented. They're emotional. They're talkative. And they can be extraordinarily dramatic. I was on a tour one time with I was in high school, with one of my high school teachers in Europe. And the tour guide referred, my high school English teacher was obviously, she was a dramatist dying to get out. And I remember the tour guide saying, "Oh, your teacher, Margot, my mother," the tour guide said, "My mother was on the stages of Europe for 40 years and is not as dramatic as Margot." That was my teacher. They just clashed. They're enormously dramatic. They're a lot of fun to be around. But they like to be the center of attention. So how are you going to have to sell to an expressive?
Use a lot of use statements like how it's gonna affect them, and talk about them, and ask them questions, because they're not talking about them.
I think that's right. You have to use a lot of, you have to make them the center of attention. You have to be careful, because you don't want to be patronizing with expressives, because they may be able to figure out what you're doing. But they do, flattery in the appropriate amount and in the right direction can work with them, because they like to be the center of attention. So now that you have the 4 types, let's talk about VALs. Values, attitudes, and lifestyles from the Strategic Business Insight. You should take this test as well. So vowels is a typology based on whether or not you have a lot of access to resources or very limited access to resources, and whether or not you focus on ideals, abstraction, morality, things like that, achievement, or self-expression. So self-expression might be what we think of as being, the Maslow's self-actualized person. So there are 8 distinct types in the vowels typology. Again, if you go to Strategic Business Insights, and the website is on the PowerPoint, so you can go there and you can take the vowels survey and figure out what type you are. I would be willing to guess that most people in here are probably strivers or achievers based on your resources. Maybe some experiencers in here. We probably don't have any survivors. Some of you may be innovators. Generally, college students tend to be particularly young people if they have some access to resources. And again, what you have to think about when we talk about access to resources is this is a continuum, and you have to view it in relation to what you currently know. So what we consider high access to resources is very different. Everybody in this room, by the way, if we were to take you all out and drop you in the middle of, I don't know, sub-Saharan Africa somewhere, like, Swaziland or something like that, which, by the way, Swaziland is, I think, the only country that was free and independent for almost all of the history of Africa, but they have they're landlocked, they don't have a lot of access to resources. Anybody in this room would probably be in the top 5% of, in terms of wealth and access to resources if we dropped you into that community. But in relation to Edmond, your access to resources is probably, what is Edmond? What do we know about Edmond? Land of the shallow and pretentious, based on sort of general demographics. What do you think we know about Edmond?
Isn't it on the highest income per capita?
It is. It's the highest income per capita in the state of any city.
So we take the bottom 15% if
Maybe, yeah. The average income in Edmond is well over $75,000 a year. The average household income is well over $75,000 a year. What's the median household income in Oklahoma? Would you guess?
35 or 42?
It's about 35. You're correct. It's about 35. Of course, that takes into account Antlers and Goaty Bow and all those other places. So again, this is a continuum, but you should take the vowels type and sort of see where you are in there. So there's the website. So innovators. Innovators are constantly taking in information. These are the people that you go out to dinner or lunch with, and if you say something, they've instantly got their Android, their iPhone, whatever it is, and they're doing what?
Googling.
They're Googling it. If you say something, they're constantly going to, try to check it, double, make sure that you're correct. They're very confident and they're willing to experiment. They engage in a high number of financial transactions. They have, again, access to resources. They use them. And they're extremely receptive to new ideas. These are what we call in marketing early adopters. When the iPhone first came out, and of course to you all this seems like ancient history, but to a guy who had his first cell phone, which was a bag phone that weighed 7 pounds, had to be plugged in constantly to the charger in the car if you were using it. I think I told you all this when I was growing up. I had a cell phone in high school. I was one of the first people in high school to have it. It cost $1,000. It was in a bag. It had about 15 minutes on its own. Its battery you can talk for about 15 minutes without it going dead. And it had about 8 to 12 hours of sort of standby time when you're not doing anything with it. At this point in my life, this is an iPhone, I think it's the 7. I got it when the 7 came out. And I'm annoyed by how quickly the battery, like, I'm at 86%, it was at 100% when I walked in here today, but I'm streaming between the camera and my device, and it sucks up a lot of power doing that, because it's using the Wi-Fi, and so Wi-Fi uses a lot of power. Bluetooth is another thing. So I'm at like 86% in one class, and I'm like getting nervous, right? I'm jonesing for a power source, because if I don't have this device, it causes great trauma to me. And so I had these friends that when the iPhone came out, they were the first ones that I knew to get one. They stood in line, they put in their pre-order, I mean, everything, and I was like, well, there's $300 down the drain. And they said, what do you mean? I said, the price will drop by $300, and in 3 months. It'll go, I mean, it'll be $100 per month. I would be willing to bet that it will drop by that amount. And Apple takes advantage at that time, and they still do, of what's called a skimming price model, which is you launch it, you set a high initial price because people like my friends, who both, this couple went out and got these iPhones, were willing to pay the premium. To be the first one, at that point in time, it was not, Facebook wasn't the dominant social media platform. It was something that you all probably haven't even heard of. It's still around, I think, although it's gone mostly the way of the dodo, called MySpace. And they were the first ones on MySpace to post, to tell everybody about their wonderful new, and I was like, there's $300 down the drain, because in 3 months it'll drop. And sure enough, in 3 months, the price of the Apple iPhone dropped about $300. Now, Apple uses what they do is they use a cannibalization model, which means that they did what? They released 3 models at once, actually, this last time. They released the 8, the 8 Plus, and the iPhone 10, all at the same time. They were using and I would be willing to bet that couple was the first one. I have another colleague here on campus, Keith Roland-Eakins in political science, and I have no idea, he's a political scientist. Those people make $50,000 or $60,000 a year. They don't make the 6 figures that we make in the College of Business. And he ran out. He was the first one to buy the iPhone 10. They're willing to take on new things just because it's new and it's shiny. Ooh, shiny, right? I mean, it's great. And they're willing to take those kinds of risks. They have the financial resources to do it. Thinkers. Thinkers are normative. What does normative mean? What does it mean when I say normative? What's up there? They focus on the ought, or the should. Normative is a prescription. These people can have analysis paralysis. They tend to take a historical perspective. They tend to be highly educated. But they like history. They read a lot. And they like history. And so they tend to view things in historical terms. They tend to remember lessons from the past and not necessarily want to repeat them. They use technology in very functional ways. So if you all have parents or grandparents that are highly educated, they're probably going to be falling into this category. They're willing to learn things, but they're very sort of, they're going to think about it and take their time. They tend to buy proven products. These are the people that are going to do research on Consumer Reports and look at what's proven. Forever and ever and ever, when I was growing up again, in the 1970s, if you bought a Japanese car, that meant junk. Is that what Japanese cars mean today? No. What was the high-end, reliable car when I was growing up? The Mercedes-Benz was the sort of that good German engineering. These people took a long time to come to believe that, Toyota could manufacture a reliable car. Now they do. The Japanese actually started manufacturing, in the 1980s and 1990s, they manufactured a lot better cars than the Americans, but it took time. They did that by they used a penetration marketing model to begin with. The Japanese introduced, really after World War II, they started wanting to rebuild their economy, and they did that largely with the help of the Americans. They introduced their products cheaply to try and get people to adopt them and try them. They weren't necessarily great cars, they were kind of throwaway, but they built, they gained technological skills in that process and knowledge of how the American markets worked. And now, I don't think anybody thinks, usually when you think of Japanese, what do you think of? If I said it to your generation. What do you think when I say Japanese car? It's what?
Like a Toyota. Didn't they also make Lexus?
Yep, they make Lexus. Well, what do you think of? What's not the name brands? What do you think of? What?
No, they're not being good.
Not name brands. What do you think of when I say Japanese car? Most people today say dependable. That's what the number one buzzword is with Japanese cars. Believers. Believers tend to believe in right and wrong, very black and white, dichotomous. And they think that this leads to the good life. That following sort of moralistic approach. They're spiritual, friendly, and like consistency. When I was growing up in Oklahoma, I grew up in Guthrie, Oklahoma. Guthrie is a town of about 10,000 people. We had a whole lot of these people. You could have fired a cannon off in downtown Guthrie between 8 and 12:30 on Sunday morning and not hit a single soul. Because we had, when I was growing up at that time, we had 45, in a town of 10,000 people, we had 45 churches. We had something like 6 Baptist, if one Baptist church isn't good enough for you, we had 6 of all kinds of, they would get mad at one another and just split off and form a new church. We had a lot of believers. If you weren't in church on Sunday, people looked at you like you had just grown horns. They just thought that was just absolutely, hedonistic. So they value consistency. These people tend to, at this point in time, be older. One of the things that we know about your generation is you have higher instances of what are called nuns. And by nuns, we don't mean the people like Sally Field was in The Flying Nun. Again, that was before my era, don't think that, but I watched it Nick at Night again. There was this TV show called The Flying Nun, which was with Sally Field, and she was this cute little nun in this habit, and she could fly because the habit had these sort of bat wings out. And by nuns, I don't mean those kinds of nuns, the people with the black habit and white band, with the rosary beads hanging down. It means that you identify as none of the above when they ask you questions on surveys about religion. Your group, your generation has the highest level of, so when we say are you Baptist, Presbyterian, Episcopalian. Now it doesn't necessarily mean that you don't go to church, although in record numbers you are going less and less. But you're more willing to go to what? Rather than going to the Catholic Church, the Baptist Church, the Episcopal Church. Yeah, you go to non-denominational, Life Cult out on I-35 or something like that. So these people, believers, tend to be older than your cohort in many instances. Although, again, one of the things that you have to remember about these kinds of things is that one of the biggest fallacies, in statistics particularly, is applying characteristics of the aggregate to the individual and then also trying to generalize from the individual to the aggregate. So you will find people that are deeply religious among your cohort, it's just that you find fewer of them. on hold. Achievers. Achievers tend to be goal-oriented, moderate. They tend to believe in me first, my family first. They put themselves and their family above all else. They tend to be anchors of the status quo. They value technology in that it provides productivity. In many instances, these are first generation wealth. And a lot of them are people that we might call dinks. What is a dink as opposed to a yuppie? Anybody know? A dink is double income, no kids. On their way up, as a result, they're willing to push people out of their way. In the pursuit of their goals, with that me first, my family first attitude. Strivers. A lot of your generation fall into this. They have low access to resources because the biggest shift in wealth in this country, by the way, has been from the young to the old. Historically speaking, the elderly lived off of their family, and it was young people because they were productive that had most of the wealth, because you were able to produce stuff. If you go back in time, when you had, everybody was living out on 40 acres with their mule and a plow, it was the young people that made the money, and so, elderly people generally lived with their family. They may have limited access to resources because they couldn't work, and so they weren't productive. That has flipped in the modern economy and in a post-industrial society. The biggest transfer of wealth has been from the young to the old. And so a lot of your generation fall into this. They have, they're interested in expression, but they have low access to resources. They have high revolving unemployment. This is typical, and it's not necessarily a bad thing among your generation, in that you all are more willing to take more transitory or temporary work because you have other goals. You do not, unlike older generations. If you go back to traditionalists, so there are 5 generations in the workforce today. For the first time in history, there are 5 generations that have entered the workforce. There are traditionalists, which are people probably of your grandparents' generation, or for some of you, your great-grandparents' generation. There are their children, which are the baby boomers, those people that were born after World War II, have a tendency to be sort of like the traditionalists, although they may have been called, some argue, the first generation to think of me, be called the me generation. I think Gen Xers are actually the first to really be the me generation, which is my generation. So I was born to a baby boomer, I'm a Gen Xer. Then there is your generation, which we call the millennials, and there are now children of the millennials, those early millennials. My brother was born in 1979, so he is an early millennial or a very late Xer. And although he has relatively small children, most of the people in his class, because you went to Guthrie High School and you were, married and pregnant by the time you were, 19 out of high school, a lot of his classmates already have grandchildren. And so their children are working. So I don't know what we're going to call that generation. I guess we're going to call them Generation Z or something like that. So we have 5 generations actually in the workforce. The traditionalists lived to work. Your generation, my generation, and younger do not. The reason I have this job is because I do not live to work. I was a corporate attorney. I absolutely hated that experience. I made an astronomical amount of money, but I wanted to have a job where I could have more flexibility. So my job requirements, when I started thinking about what I wanted to do when I grew up, and I'm still not sure that I have grown up, was I wanted to work 2 days a week and make 6 figures. What can you do to work 2 days a week and make 6 figures? Oh, it's called PhD in marketing. Not PhD in political science, or history, or philosophy, PhD in marketing. Now, it turns out that if you get a PhD in accounting, you're going to make a lot over 6 figures. The newest minted PhD in accounting that I know got an offer for $220 this last year, starting out for a 9-month contract. So I'm lazy. I'm inherently lazy. I chose this job because that's what I wanted to do. I wanted a lifestyle. And that's your generation as well. You are willing to do this. So I have a friend who's lamenting, he's a Gen Xer like me, and they were hiring a position, and they found one person that was qualified, and it was a millennial. And he said, yep, but I'm not gonna, I don't wanna, I wanna have lots of time off, and I'm gonna work from home. And the culture that he's in, he works for NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, at the Weather Service, Radar Operations Center, and so they were looking for somebody, and this kid is a good database administrator, and you can do that remotely now. And that's abhorrent to that, I mean, that's just not the way the government works. They're not about letting you, except for college professor, they're not about letting you work remotely. But that's your generation. You're willing to take transitory or piecemeal sort of stuff, and as a result, you have high revolving employment. You tend to be fun-loving and you wear your wealth. Why is that? Why is that the strivers wear their wealth? It's not that they're saying, I'm rich, but rather sociologists tell us that they're saying what? I'm not poor. And so they tend to wear their wealth. Experiencers. Experiencers want everything. The first in and out of a trend. So they adopt early. They're the ones that bought the iPhone but are willing to try the Android as soon as it comes out. They go against the mainstream. They tend to be very social. What kinds of things would experiencers do? Here in Oklahoma City, what has recently been opened that an experiencer would love?
Well, what is Topgolf?
It was Topgolf, there's now something else. It's right next to, it's what?
Is
I
it
said hot
iFly?
dog, Sky Road.
What?
The fly thing?
Yeah, you got 5 points. It's iFly. I mean, these people
Sky
are,
Zone is better than iFly.
what is?
Sky Zone is better than
Sky Zone is better than iFly, okay.
Come see
All
us.
right, they're the ones that just, you know, are the first ones. It may be better, Sky Zone may be better, but I mean, the day it opened, I have friends that are, you know, over there standing in line to do that. Makers. Makers, low access to resources, they tend to distrust government. They're interested in things like automotive. They believe strongly in gender roles and in gender identity. They're horrified at the androgynous takeover of society that's happened, particularly among your generation. The fact that you wear clothes that are unisex, that you can't tell from one to another. Their favorite thing is things like, they're the ones that, if you think of it in terms of beer, they're going to drink, you know, the Natural Light. How many of you remember
Natty Light?
Natty Light or Beast? From, you know, back in the day when you had no money, no access to resources. Survivors are the very bottom. Now there are two types. I told you that the greatest transfer of wealth has been from young to old, and that's true. But there are a lot of consumers that in that have fallen by the wayside because they didn't plan for retirement. So the biggest transfer of wealth has been from young to old, but there are a small set of older people that really are on fixed incomes. Their income doesn't go up, and as a result of inflation and pressurized prices, they have really fallen behind. They tend to be thrifty. They're loyal to brands and products. They believe that television and advertising are legitimate sources of information. And they tend to spend lots of time alone. They're also the ones that are most likely to have a landline in their home.
That's like the most expensive phone now.
What?
The landline is the most expensive phone now.
They are, but they're not. I mean, these people are, you know, they have no idea what this is for a lot of them. What did you say? I just described what?
My grandmother.
Your grandmother.
Tootsie.
Okay.
Only.
I think a lot of people have grandmothers that would describe. They still have, you know, the rotary dial phone in their house. Any questions about social styles or vowels types? All right, so we need to talk about prospecting, and then I'm going to start talking about prospecting, but I'm going to give you time in class to start thinking about this. We'll talk a little bit more about prospecting next time, and I'll let you finish in class your ideas on the critical thinking challenge. So, prospecting. Prospecting is the search for potential customers. The search for and qualification of potential customers. There are a couple of things that you need to know. There are leads. Leads are the name of anybody who may be a potential customer. Anybody. For most people and many products, that's everybody. But really, it's not. We've become the most differentiated, and that I've told you is maybe the most important term in marketing today, is differentiation. We want lots of variety in our products, we demand them, and so we have lots of differentiation. In the past, you would have said that almost everybody was a prospect for milk. Almost everybody bought milk. They had delivered milk to the door. The milkman, that's a sort of a old concept, but people actually drank a lot of milk. It turns out it's not very good for you. And we've become highly, again, differentiated. So a lead is just anybody who may be a potential customer. A prospect is one who actually needs your product. Now, lots of people have needs for products, but they can't afford to buy it. So a qualified prospect, or they don't have the access to buy it. You may be able to have the money to buy it, but if you live in certain countries, for example, if you live in Mexico, one of the most wealthy individuals in the world today is actually a Mexican national named Carlos Slim. And Carlos Slim got wealthy by basically, owning the monopoly in telecommunications in Mexico. As a result, if you go to Mexico, the selection of telecommunications, particularly in personal cellular telephones, is largely controlled to this day, as I understand it, by Carlos Slim. And it's, you have far fewer choices in terms of carriers than you even do in the United States, where we have very few choices. So even if you have the resources, even if you're wealthy in Mexico and you want to go with Verizon, you're not going to be able to get Verizon, because Verizon is not probably, or it may not be in your area. Cultivating. Some leads are ready but can't make the decision right now, but they can be cultivated to becoming a qualified prospect. How are you going to qualify? Use the Madden approach. Money, approachable, desire. Make sure you have the decision maker. So you may have somebody who's got money, they may be approachable, they may have the desire. College professors don't necessarily set the world on fire in terms of their income, but they do okay, by and large, for the most part. So we may have the money, for example, to buy things like, I may want a new computer in this classroom because I want a Mac instead of this, and I have the money, if I wanted to go out and buy the Mac and put it in this classroom. But am I the decision maker? Can I do that? Can I unilaterally say, God, I teach in 211 most of the time, and I really want a Mac rather than this crappy PC that's in here. You all have seen the commercial. How many of you remember the commercial where they had two guys, one was the Mac and one was the PC, and the PC guy was kind of dumpy and slurps. Did you see this commercial? It was the funniest commercial. And then there's this cool young hipster guy that is the Mac, and I'm slow, and so I may want that, but can I do that? Can I just switch that out? Can I just decide, no? Even though I have money, if there were a Mac salesman in here that was I'm approachable, I have desire. So it has to be the decision maker, eligible, and they have to have a need. So this is how you're going to qualify. So I'm going to give you the rest of time today to look at that critical thinking challenge in your groups. So what you're going to do is you are going to Dropbox. You're going to pretend that you work for Paycom, which is a local company. Get on paycom.com. Look at them. Pretend that you work for them. I used to use ADP because that's what we used. You are to assume that your team, that's your group that you're in, works for Paycom, and you have prospect in areas outside of Oklahoma City. So I've given you some examples. You can use any city besides Oklahoma City, and the reason I say that is because it's easy to come up with lots of businesses that you probably have somewhat intimate familiarity with in Oklahoma City. So you can use Guthrie, Edmond, Piedmont, Nakoma Park, Nichols Hills, the Village, Del City, Norman, Moore, Midwest City, Yukon, Mustang, or El Reno, and you need to find a target. What business do you think would be useful, might be a good target for Paycom? Almost every business now, by the way, needs to start using it, because payroll, and the way it used to be done, is horrible. And you can now do payroll online from your phone. ADP offers apps that are very convenient, and they do it for small business owners as well. So find a business. Once you've found a business, identify using the Madden approach, who is the decision maker, who has the money and the ability to make the decisions. And then based on those identifications, what is the decision maker's social style? What do you think their vowels type would be? Based on, so what are you gonna do? I'm gonna give you hints here at where are you gonna look. If I were you, once I find who I think the decision maker is, I would get on social media and start looking at social media to determine what you think their typology is and their vowels. And then submit your thing on Dropbox. I'll give you until, we'll work on this a little bit in class at the beginning of the hour on Thursday, and I'll give you until midnight on Thursday probably, unless we get something really major happens, to finish up. So I'm gonna give you 15 minutes now to work in your groups on this, and we'll work on it some more the first 15 or 20 minutes in class, and then we'll talk about what you come up with on Thursday for the second half of class. Any questions? All right.